Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod live to talk about what's going on here in the program after MSU's exit from the NCAA tournament in the Elite Eight. Unfortunately, we're not going to be previewing MSU's matchup in the Final Four, but maybe next year. And that's going to be the topic of discussion in part for tonight. Before we begin, a quick shout out to all you loyal supporters of the show and a new supporter at the Draymond Green level on Patreon, Greg Bamer. Thanks a lot, Greg, and to all of you who help make the show happen. We really appreciate it. To find out ways to support the show, head on over to tffinots.com/support to get the necessary links to be a one-time supporter or recurring supporter. Okay, Rod, traditionally we've begun our MSU season in review, going through the players after the season ends, but I think we both agree that with everything going on, it just didn't feel like this was the right time to talk about that. So instead, I titled the show Portal on the Wall. And let's begin the discussion with a question asked by one of our listeners who wrote in and asked, I think, a really good question, just kind of basics to kind of level to sort of set the foundation. So if we could define NIL and pay for play, it seems a good place to start the discussion. And so I guess I'll give you my take on it and I'll let you sort of expand on a better definition. I mean, my impression, I see people use they throw these terms around all the time: pay for play, NIL. And NIL is name, image, and likeness, which means basically that players get paid for using their name, their image, and likeness. So essentially it's a way for them to, if they're in a video game, they get some sort of cut from EA Sports. Or if they're on, that was sort of the classic case with Ed O'Bannon, right, in USC. If, you advertise, you do an ad for carpet, you could get paid for these things where traditionally you were, as an amateur athlete, you weren't allowed to get any revenue from sort of thing. And then, or if they sell your name on the back of a jersey at the university, you get some sort of cut of that. And then pay for play is essentially like saying, well, there's a name, image, and likeness provision, but we're going to say, as long as you're just existing, we're going to give you some money. And so essentially NIL is we're not really paying for your value, because your value in the marketplace, as far as an advertisement for, say, a Ford dealership in town, is really not that much. Really, your value is just on the court and just being on the team. And so you're essentially just saying, we're going to pay you just to play. I don't know, maybe you'll sign some baseball card or basketball cards or something like that. But for the most part, you're getting money for just playing at our university. And so NIL is kind of pay for play. How would you sort of expand on that? Or, maybe there's a better definition.
Well, it's a complicated subject. I don't disagree with anything you said, other than identifying Ed O'Bannon as a USC player. I'm sure he wouldn't like that,
Right.
since he played at UCLA. But
I know the Big Ten schools.
other than that, um, yeah, I think that's all generally correct. But I'll try to provide a little more in depth. So, name, image, and likeness relates to, in legal terms, what's called the right of publicity, which is, as you articulated, it is the right that you have to utilize those three things: your name, your image, and or your likeness, um, in ways that exploit those elements for compensation, for consideration, which is usually money. For a long time, up until very recently, in fact, that was verboten for quote unquote amateur athletes. If you exploited your rights in name, image, and likeness, you would be deemed to be ineligible to play collegiate sports. And you mentioned Ed O'Bannon knowingly. Now, we had one of the attorneys who was part of Ed O'Bannon's case, which revolved around the utilization of athletes' name, image, and likeness in video games that were produced by EA Sports. Michael McCann, who I mentioned at the time we did that episode last summer, and I would reiterate, is a great follow if you are interested generally in legal issues that interact with the world of athletics, both professional and whatever we're calling college sports these days. I guess also
Right.
professional,
Yeah.
professional junior. But specifically in regard to the things that we talk about constantly now, which you've raised here with NIL, pay for play, et cetera. He's a really great follow. And I highly recommend highly recommend following him on X. I'm not sure if he's on any of the other social media sites like Blue Sky or Threads, but if he is, you can follow him there too. Anyway, he was directly involved in that case. And I'll just say, without getting too deep in the weeds, because we can talk for hours about this. And in fact, you and I have talked on this podcast for hours with different guests, with Mr. McCann. We've also done it a couple of times with Jay Billis. And I think I referenced this in an episode recently here, I think. If I haven't, I'll reiterate it now. There is a great recent episode that I heard last weekend. Coach K has, I believe it's a weekly show, at least during the season, on Sirius XM satellite radio. And
Hmm.
last weekend, I happened to hear an episode that Jay Billis, who's been a guest with us a couple times, was on, and of course he played for Coach K. And they spent the bulk of their time talking about all of these kinds of issues, and it was outstanding. And once again, I always find when I listen to Jay talk in depth about these things, as opposed to in 2 minute ESPN sound bites,
Right.
I learned something. And he usually, what he's got to say causes me to either think more in depth about this stuff or maybe changes my perception a little bit. And that was the case with this episode as well, in one very important regard, which I'll get into in a second. Um, so I highly recommend seeking that out if you happen to be a satellite radio subscriber. Anyway, back to NIL. So NIL theoretically is supposed to mean exactly what it says and what you alluded to. So it's things like lending your name to a company to help advertise their product. That's a
Right.
classic example of NIL income. And the O'Bannon case was significant in leading to eventually what we have now with NIL being legitimized for collegiate athletes, that it no longer accepting money in exchange for exploitation of NIL would no longer lead to you being deemed ineligible to participate in collegiate athletics. That, again, without getting too deep in the weeds, all of this has to do, if you're talking about the area of the law that these things really are part of, it's antitrust. And antitrust has two main facets. And again, I'm being really simplistic here because I don't think most of you want a dissertation on antitrust. But antitrust deals typically with two main areas. One, I think most people are pretty familiar with, it's monopolies. The idea that we don't want to have situations where one company controls 100% or 98%, the lion's share of a market. And when that happens, the government tends, if they're serious about antitrust involvement, they act to break up monopolies. So we've seen it with regard to the phone companies years ago with Ma Bell, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that led to a revolution in telecommunications where now we have numerous companies that provide cell phone service, even provide, for the few people that are still using it, landlines, right?
Right. Yeah.
You can get landline service through your cable company. That didn't used to be the case. But
Hmm.
anyway, that's one aspect of antitrust, but that's not what we're concerned about here. What we're concerned about is the other element of antitrust, which is artificial restraint of trade. So it's interference with the ability of people to earn money, simply put. And that's what the O'Bannon case dealt with. That's what NIL is addressing, and why the NCAA, after just continually getting hammered in courtrooms. I mean,
Right.
these guys have a losing streak that would make the Washington Generals blush. And it isn't over, by the way. I'll
Yeah.
come back to that in a bit. That's not over. They're not done losing. But they finally just threw their hands up and said, "All right, we're gonna let this stuff happen."
Right.
Now, they will argue that, well, all we meant was truly name, image, and likeness. You want to, like, you remember that ad that AJ Hogarth did? And I was
Yeah, with
Tre
hot dogs or
Holloman in
something.
that one too. Somebody
Yeah,
else
it
was
was he
in
and
that
Trey.
one with
Yeah.
him.
Hmm.
Yeah. And we see these things. You see the MSU players advertising for a lot of local businesses. That's what the NCAA will tell you they were anticipating. And I'm sure they were. But let's get real. This
Yeah.
was known from day one, that what this was going to be in one way, shape, or form was what you're calling pay for play, which is boosters, because universities can't do it, funneling money to players in order to get them to play at the school they support. And that's exactly what's happened. So when we talk about so and so school having a $7 million NIL budget, well, that's what we're talking about. We're not even talking about those commercial opportunities that the athletes might get for themselves.
Right.
We're talking about, here's a wad of money, here's a wad of cash, and in exchange for that, you're going to play for this school.
Hmm.
That's it. And that's any sane person knew that was going to be the case. The only question was how it was going to manifest, whether these collectives or boosters or some combination thereof were going to go through some kind of charade of making them sign some kind of personal services contract, something like that. As it turns out, my understanding is there's virtually no contracting going on anywhere for this stuff. It is truly the wild, wild west. And when you hear numbers, just as an aside, when you hear numbers about this stuff, so you'll see, the Jeff Goodmans of the world, the real dopes, um, talking about so and so got a $2 million deal to play at School X. He doesn't know shit. That's what somebody told him. That's what an
Right.
agent likely told him. And that might be true. It's not definitively untrue, but we have no way of verifying any of this because it's not public information. As I say, my understanding is there aren't contracts being entered into. So how the hell do we know? And keep in mind, when most of the information relating to money is coming via agents, and it is, because the schools have no real motivation to talk about it. The
Right.
players might, but probably not. It's the agents.
Yeah.
Think about it for a second, just a second. That's all it takes. And try to surmise, what would the motivation be for an agent lying? Well, it's because by claiming that player X has offers of Y and Z to go to school AA, it might encourage other schools to come in and top the offer. I will tell you a quick story, something that just came to me. I'm not going to name any of the parties because I don't want to put anybody in the crosshairs. I got a DM last night from somebody who was a member on the Spartan Mag board. It was sent to me and to Jim Comparoni. Wasn't about anything to do with MSU, but he was just letting us know this was a situation he was familiar with. A family friend of his is a current D1 basketball player. And that
Hmm.
individual went into the portal and he was going to commit to a certain school in a state that you once lived in. That's as much as I'll say. And
Okay.
so he started letting the other schools he had been talking to know that this is the decision, this is where he was going to go. And what happened is all of those other schools, or many of them at least, came back and said, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. How much are they offering? Because we can top that. And sure enough, he had offers doubling the original amount that he was going to commit for within 24 hours from
Yeah.
numerous schools. And in fact, that player announced his commitment to another school in the upper Midwest last night. So not the original place he was going to go. And he wasn't looking to do it. He wasn't trying to
He was just
create a
being
bidding
nice
war.
guy, telling him, hey,
And
just so you
just
know.
right, trying to be a responsible kid and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, this is this is what I'm going to do. I just wanted to let you know so you can move on and, make other plans. And instead, he found himself the subject of a bidding war. Now, that wasn't even a case where an agent was doing it. And that happened for the right reasons. But just imagine if you have somebody who's trying to game the system.
Sure.
Do they have an incentive to exaggerate? You better believe they do.
They're getting 10%. 10% of a bigger number.
So
is
they
more
want to
money.
goose
Yeah.
that number. And by the way, this doesn't make them immoral. I know Izzo refers to these guys as whatever term he was using. It wasn't
Dirt bags or
scumbags, I
something.
don't think,
Dirt
but it was
bags, I think.
dirtbags,
Yeah.
scumbags, close enough. Dirtbags. That doesn't make them a dirtbag, in my view. They are acting in the interest of their client, at least financially. Now, Izzo would, I think, probably argue, yeah, but is that really the most important interest, or is that at least the only interest? And he's probably got a point. But regardless, especially if a player, which we never know, says to an agent, "Look, I just want the biggest bag you can find." Okay.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make anybody involved anything except a red-blooded American, because that's how we roll in a capitalist system, right?
Yeah. Right.
That's it. So when people get on their high horse about this stuff, I have a hard time with that, because there's nothing inherently wrong with making as much money as you can. In fact, in any other course of life, we tend to celebrate it. But
Yeah.
here, for some reason, we have some people who find their sense of morality offended by this. And I can't get there, even if I can acknowledge there are lots of negatives that come with this system, tons of them. And there's
Yeah.
a better way to do this. I'm absolutely convinced of that too. But in terms of morality, come on. So
Yeah.
so anyway, that's the difference. They're fundamentally, NIL is not really what's going on. It
Right.
really is pay for play. Izzo made an interesting comment during, remember that press conference he had before the Sweet
Yeah.
16 where he just went off. He made a comment that is absolutely true as I understand it. He said, "Don't kid yourself. There's no recruiting going on in the portal. There are offers." There's a difference there. If you see
Yeah.
getting
Right.
at, you know, yeah, sometimes kids are visiting campuses and they're meeting a coach in person. That does happen. Certainly happens at MSU. But the reality is, most of these scenarios, we've talked about it. Like when you look at these programs that are shuffling in, 7, 8, 9 new bodies a year, how can they possibly know what they're getting? Because they haven't spent months or years recruiting these guys. In most instances, they've spent days, and probably not double-digit days,
Yeah.
in talking to these guys. So it's a crapshoot. You're throwing stuff at a wall and you're hoping enough of it sticks. That's really what it is. So that's the situation as it exists. It truly is an unregulated market. It is one, in, I would venture a guess, almost all situations, devoid of any contracts, which means it's devoid of security on both sides, which is why it's a problem.
Yeah.
One of the reasons it's a problem.
I feel like the whole situation, and the contracting is a little bit different, but I would say in general, most people are not going to go through this point where they have an agent looking for work for them. But I would say that if you own a house or you have sold a house, this is not that different a situation, right? There are bidding wars that occur with houses. There are, agents the agents have every reason to jack up the price of a house, or, close a deal, even if it's
You
not the
make a
best
good
for
you make a good
right?
you make a good point.
And so
Has
we all kind of
anybody
experience this.
has anybody ever had a real estate agent say to a potential buyer, I do have somebody else coming in who's already told me they're planning on
Oh yeah,
making an
for
offer?
sure. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Right.
So
Might be true. Who
it might
knows?
be true, might not.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
you as the home buyer or as a home seller might not even know that your agent is saying that. But
right.
your agent thinks they're acting on in your best interests, and sometimes they would be. So yeah, this is all as American as apple pie.
Yeah. I
It's
think
There's a better way to do it, but I'm not morally offended by any of it.
Yeah,
at this point.
I'm with you too, and I do think there's a unique thing about sports and about college athletics that we both recognize. That's why seems weird. It doesn't seem quite right, and that's where that sort of whether it's a morality or there's like a jilted lover sort of feel to it that you just kind of feel you've been rejected if you that's your school. I mean, we can get into that sort of a little bit, but the other question people always are asking, and this goes to your point earlier, right? Is well, what is MSU's budget? Like they losing these guys, they must not have enough money. Why are they not paying these guys to stick around? And we'll go into specifics of who in just a little bit. But I think it's fair to say that we don't know what MSU's budget is. It's not public information. If
Correct.
this was Michigan State is obviously a public university. If Michigan State had a contract with, let's say, a player or a student somewhere on campus, that salary could be known. I mean, I think probably with low level hourly workers, they don't keep that sort of stuff. But like you can look up professors, you can look up deans and those sorts of things. That's all publicly available information. You can
Correct.
find out the budget for the athletic department. There's no like, R&D that's off the books like the CIA or something like that. I mean, the university is all just obviously would not be the case for a private institution, but essentially you said this is not part of the university. So it's not, it's just some nebulous group of people, one person. Like,
That's right.
I talked to you earlier, they had some guy who, or I assume it's a guy, $5 million NIL deal for a wrestler, to come and wrestle for Iowa. He's
Christ.
a phenom. He's amazing. He's an incredible wrestler, but all it takes is one person who's like, I want my school that I support
Yeah.
to have this amazing guy, and I'm willing to pay. We saw that in Michigan with their quarterback coming in next year. I mean, I guess I feel like there must be some contracting, right? I mean, there has to be some sort of thing where an agreement where these players feel comfortable, first of all, that they
Nope.
pay an agent gets any money,
Nope.
but so there's no contract at all.
Well,
So
there's
they're just
probably
assuming
no.
there's money's going to show up and
There's
monthly.
an agreement. There's an agreement between the agent and the player, definitely.
Okay.
Um, I guess I shouldn't say that definitively. There may
Because I would
be
think there's got to be
agreements.
some sort of guarantee that you
There
don't
may
show
be
up and like,
agreements in place, but I guess the reason that I'm dubious about a lot of that stuff is where are the lawsuits?
right. Well,
Because
spoken like a lawyer, but you're right. Yeah, right.
the we and there it's not that there haven't been any. I seem to recall, and I'm forgetting the kid's name. There was a quarterback a couple of years ago who had been highly rated, and he skipped around, went to a few different schools, and I think there is litigation around his NIL
Right.
situation. So, first of all, if there are contracts, they're private and they're not
Sure.
subject to freedom of information. They're
Absolutely.
not public records, so we're never going to know the details of those. But I guess the reason I'm saying I'm dubious about a lot of that is if you look, you will find lots and lots and lots of stories where kids say they didn't end up getting what they were promised. Happens all the time,
Right. Hmm.
more than you think.
Yeah.
And so that's the deal, you know. Turning to your real question here, which is the MSU budget. No, nobody knows. And you know what? I think even if you had Tom Izzo or somebody else in the basketball office on a polygraph, they probably couldn't tell you
Yeah.
definitively. I don't think this is again, these dipshits in the media start talking about, oh, so and so school's got a $7 million budget. How the hell do you know?
Yeah.
If a player comes up where they've got $2 million left and they really want this guy, and it turns out that he's got an offer somewhere else for 2.5 million, and the guy comes back around to that school and says, "Hey, if you match, I'll go with you." Might that mean that that school's budget gets raised suddenly to 7.5 million? Sure.
Yeah.
There's this
We see
isn't
this with coaching for practice all
there's
the
no
time, right?
cap.
You buy out coaches, right? Suddenly
There's no cap
you find the
here.
money. Yeah.
There's
Right.
no system in place that, so come on with that nonsense.
Yeah.
What
So
matters is, does a school have the ability to marshal resources that in the way that they want? And everything I have ever heard from the moment this stuff became reality is that Tom Izzo has everything he needs,
right.
everything he could want. Now, here's where the rub is. You can read that and say, well, MSU could go out and spend $10 million if they wanted. And you know what? I'm betting they probably could, because there are enough boosters with real muscle, some of whom most of you know the names of, others you might not know,
Right.
but are nonetheless involved, who could and would support that. If Tom Izzo came to, say, Matt Ishbia, and don't believe this nonsense about, well, Matt Ishbia is an NBA owner now, so he's prohibited from, please, please. If he went to Ishbia or Greg Williams or any of these other guys that are involved and said, hey, this kid is somebody that can make the difference in us having a shot at a Final Four or not, I need X amount of dollars. My understanding from people who would know is that money is there,
Yeah.
period, like full stop. But here's the rub. Does Tom Izzo want to spend all the money on God's green earth to field a team? Does he think that's wise? Does he want to deal with what that kind of spending can do to his locker room? Those are all very, very valid questions. And I
Right.
think you've probably got a pretty good idea, if you ever listen to him talk, that he would be very conscious of those things. What he values is exactly what he had this year, an environment where everybody feels connected and bought in. And if you are in a situation, especially if you are going out and you are paying, $2.5 million to some kid from outside your program, and you got a bunch of other guys in your locker room who have been there for 3 years and aren't getting paid anything close to that, what does that do? And then
Yeah.
how do you address that? Does that automatically mean, well, I gotta raise what these guys are making because I want everybody to be happy? You see where I'm going.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of
Yeah.
schools that don't give two you know
Yes.
what's about
I
any
appreciate
of
that.
that. Any of that. They don't care.
Yeah.
And those are the places that you see continually having to add 8, 9 guys every year because it
Kansas
just
State.
kind of rolls through. Yeah, Illinois. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you see, and there are lots of them. It's not just Illinois. It's not
No,
just
it's a
state.
lot of
There are
places.
lots of them. And that's just how it is. And those coaches don't care because they are fine, I guess, with operating in a true year to year at a true year to year level and basically functioning the way an AAU team does. Which is, well, I got a whole new
Yeah.
group of guys each year, and it's my job as a coach each fall to take that group and find a way to get them to play together and win. Okay. Well, you've heard enough from Tom Izzo. That's not ever how he's going to choose to operate. That doesn't mean he's not going to go into the portal. I think very likely that he's going to this year
Sure. He
at
did
some
last year.
point.
I
Right.
don't know. I mean, it's make
Right.
it seem like it never
But
happens.
but what kind of player that might be, that is all very much to be determined. And I just you've been privy, you've been there with me when I've had these conversations with people that would know at times, and I've had other ones you
Hmm.
haven't been, but the ones you've been there, what's what's been the portrayal of what Tom Izzo's going to do? He's not going to get in bidding wars, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
you heard that come from the mouth of someone we talked to as clearly as I did. And I know that's true. I've heard it from other people. You see the evidence of it. So those of you who, and I don't know how many of our listeners, I hope we do a pretty good job of, well, whatever. I'll let that go. I
Yeah.
can start throwing the insults
We're
out.
better informed, I think, in general,
Yeah,
and understanding.
that
Yes, we'll just say that.
yes, that would realize if you're pining for that, go find another hobby till Tom Izzo retires because
Yeah.
he's not going to do it. It would be shocking. You know, I heard and got into some discussion about this on the Spartan Mag board. I heard a rumor um, early this week about the possibility of MSU adding someone through the portal that I found very difficult to believe and would have dismissed it entirely for a couple different reasons, one of which is the price tag that would have been associated with that player. And the only reason I didn't dismiss it, well, there were two. One is you could connect some dots and have it make some sense at a certain level. And the other reason was who told me that, because I know that person is not full of you know what.
Yeah, right.
And so I took it a little bit seriously, but the overriding thing always would have been, does that really line up with what Tom Izzo's MO is in his program? And the answer was no. And, I don't think that one's going to happen. But it was something, as I noted on the Spartan Magboard, hey, I found it hard to believe, but the person who's telling me this knows their stuff. And so I can't dismiss it. And if it did happen, it would have blown minds. It blew my mind when I heard it. But as I say, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's another thing, of course, we can get into is
We'll
um,
talk
the
about all this stuff here
state
in a
of,
second. Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
wild, wild world out there. I'll
So
just say.
Scott, you on the YouTube left a little chat comment. So just a weekly reminder to you, Rod, to stop listening to the Field of 68.
I haven't
Because
been. Actually, I haven't
oh,
listened
good for
to
you.
one single word during their
Good
Final
for you.
Four
So
coverage.
we don't
Not
need to
one
talk about
second.
Goodman one more time. All right. So for those of you,
Thanks for
when it
the
comes to
reminder, though. I
when
appreciate
it
it.
comes to getting rid of clearing stuff away from your mind, clearing stuff away from your house is just as important. And so
Transit.
contact the brothers at Just Do Gutters. They only do gutter work. It's rainy season. It's spring. You want to make sure your foundation is safe. Make sure you don't have big puddles that leak into your basement or your crawl space. Uh, it's funny. It's lots of places that don't have crawl spaces, but in Michigan, of course, we do. Uh, so make sure you contact the brothers at Just Do Gutters. They only do gutters. They'll clean things up. All those huge windstorms, people have debris and everything. If you don't have leaf guards on, they can put them on. They can also clean up the gutters before they do that. Whatever you need done, the brothers can fix that up. Whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state, they take fantastic care of your house. You get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four as a listener to the show. You can find ways to contact me, get an estimate at our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. All right. So I think, the game ended Sunday, obviously, against Auburn. Was it Monday? Was Monday the 1st or was it Tuesday the 1st? I can't remember
Tuesday
now.
was the first.
Yeah. So April 1st, all the crazy things, there's the meme going around that Hunter Dickinson was given a 7th year of eligibility. He's going to come back to Kansas. Kind of joke memes. Tiger Woods said he's going to go, his Achilles is healed in 2 weeks. He's going to go golf the Masters. And then Tre Holloman put out on social media that he was entering the transfer portal. And I think after all that happened at the game after Michigan, the seniors, and Trey has 100% always seemed like a real Spartan. Love bleeds, green and white. Uh,
Yeah.
I think there's a clear, because especially since the Michigan game is the end of the season, there's a really tight emotional bond between him and the fans, the Spartan fans. And so I think people understand that he entered the portal from a money standpoint, from perhaps a playing standpoint. If he wants to be more ball dominant, be more point guard, he certainly wasn't going to start next year with Jeremy Fears, at least as starting point guard. So I think, it makes sense sort of what happened, but it was emotionally, it was a really jarring thing to happen right after, that game, sort of like the season ends. And then, oh, by the way, the guy you thought was the ultimate Spartan who pushed the two Michigan players off defending the S at half court, he's leaving. And so I think that was what hurt people more is it was like, you just find out your girlfriend just left you after 3 years, right? That you thought you had a good relationship and suddenly he's, spurning you. Now we all just talked about just a little bit ago about how this is America. We value, you can do what you want and those sorts of things. So I don't know. I mean, I think that was the portal departure that hurt Spartan fans the most. The other ones we can talk about in a little bit too with Booker and Gehrig Normand, not surprising and not ones that I think people are upset by as much. But certainly the Holloman one really hit hard, I think, just because of everything that happened at the end of the season. And then, of course, the Maryland shot and those sorts of things.
Yeah. It's a very complicated subject. And again, I noted this on the Spartan Mag board. You were there, another conversation that we had. And
Right.
I think you were there. I can't remember whether that was a conversation we had in Los Angeles
Yeah, I think it
or
was
whether
after is
or
after
whether it
Los
was just a
Angeles, but
little bit after that, and then I told you
yeah.
about it. But it was with someone we know,
Yep.
and I was told, we were told,
Yeah.
straight up by a person who would be in a position to know. And again, this is back in early February, that he expected Trey Holloman probably would go because he had been told by Trey's agent that he left money on the table last year. In other words, he had an offer that was beyond whatever MSU was paying him this year. He opted not to take it, but the implication was very strongly that that would not happen again. Now, people have talked about this. Oh, he wants to be a point guard full time and that it's role. That could be in there. All that really matters is his perception, right? But when you look
Sure.
at it, he's playing a lot of point guard as it is. And even when he wasn't, just look at the way MSU's offense functions. You can be theoretically off the ball and still end up with the ball in your hands a
Sure.
lot. And so if that's part of the reason here, that that I think is a little bit of bullshit. That's my 2 cents. He also, let's
Hmm.
be honest about it. Sometimes there could be a situation where I'll give you one where I think it might matter. If Jase Richardson was to say, hey, I need to be on the ball a lot more because I know my future in the NBA is as a point guard because of my size, and I need to be in that role. That I would buy. That I would
Sure.
say, you know what? There might be something to that. But I like Trey a lot as a player. Trey's a long shot to be an NBA player. You don't rule anybody out who plays at the high major level, but probably he's not in that same kind of situation as theoretically somebody like Jace might be, right? So I have a
Yeah.
hard time with the role stuff. And what we were told had nothing, there was not one word said about role. What was talked about was he left a lot of money on the table last year. He's not going to do that again. And this was from his agent. And
Hmm.
again, this person we heard this from talked directly to the agent. I believe it without a shadow of a doubt that it is accurate. Okay. I don't know about you. I can let you speak for yourself. I remember when I heard that, I believe saying to you, I don't think that's going to happen.
That's what that was
Isn't that what I
my
said? Right.
I think
And
it is, and that was my thought too. Like,
yeah,
I couldn't imagine it happening, but
for
I
all the
can't.
reasons you laid
Yeah,
out. Right.
yeah, right,
And at that point, we hadn't even seen the bit at center court. We hadn't seen him breaking down in the
right,
locker room after the Auburn loss, which
right.
in retrospect, you maybe
Yeah, it was
understand a little
obvious,
bit
right?
better
Yeah, he
now.
knew it. He knew.
But,
Yeah,
but all of that said, by going into hey, there was money left on the table bit, um, again, I'm not judging him. He has every right, and you can even argue he has the obligation to his family, to himself,
sure.
to do whatever he thinks is best in those terms, right? I don't question that for a second. I don't have any ill will toward him for making that choice. If in fact that's what happens, um, I only know what I hear, and the, I wanna be very clear about this. I do not have a wiretap on the basketball office's phone. So whatever stuff that I hear
I hope
is
not, because you're terrible at getting any secrets. So that,
right. Whatever stuff I hear is via people who are better positioned than I am and
right,
have the graciousness to occasionally share some of that stuff with me. And over the years you establish relationships with people that way, and you tend to know who's full of it and who isn't. And I will just say I have heard nothing's over till it's over. And then in terms of quote unquote evidence, there was a lot of smoke supposedly when he declared about, oh, there was a deal he agreed to last week with Arizona State.
Right.
Well, he hasn't committed anywhere. And now, by virtue of the fact that I'm saying this and we're
Yeah.
recording it, that almost makes it a lock that we'll stop this episode and we'll find out that he's committed somewhere.
To be clear, it's 9:20 Eastern time in the evening on
But
Friday,
but
April
for
4th.
now, not
Yeah,
only
as
has
of
he not
now.
not only has he not committed anywhere, we haven't seen one of those ridiculous, here's his top 5 lists.
Right.
We haven't
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
anything. I was told that there has been contact and there have been meetings as this week has progressed subsequent to his entering the portal. So who knows? I don't know
Yeah.
what's going to come of that. Nobody else does either, except for Trey, his mom, and those in the basketball office and his agents. Those
It,
are really the
and it
only
is
people that know. I'm just saying, until we know, nobody knows.
right. Yeah.
Until
I
it's
think
made
it's
public, we don't know what's going to happen. So could I sit here and say with 100% certitude, yeah, he's done? No. And when he announced, I actually did feel, well, that's it, because
yeah.
of
Me too.
what we had heard, and
Right.
knowing that, hey, Tom Izzo doesn't, he'll pay market rate to keep his guys. He's done that before. If you think that guys like Malik Hall and Tyson Walker and Joey Hauser, people like that in prior years weren't getting offers to leave and MSU paid enough to keep them, you're crazy. They're
Yeah.
guys, hey, you said the day and time we're recording this. I don't know that everybody that you all think is coming back will actually be back.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
heard I heard something that was very disturbing to me on Tuesday night.
I know you
Now,
sent that to me, so I couldn't sleep.
yeah, I told you. Now, the fact that, and I'm not sorry, I'm not playing hide the ball, or tweaking people. And in fact, I haven't said anything about it other than to just make a blanket statement on the Spartan Mag board that at this point, nothing positively or negatively would surprise me,
Right.
because
Well,
there is a constant stream of rumor going on from lots of different directions. The person who told me this bit of news, unfortunately for me, um, is about as much the gold standard when it would come to that kind of thing as anyone. Um, and so I trust him implicitly. And yet, after hearing that, it seems like what I feared was going to happen, which was somebody else entering the portal, has not happened. And we're like 3 days down the line from that. But could it happen? Could I wake up tomorrow and see Jeff Goodman's X account making a ref? Yes, I
I'm not
could.
going to hashtag Jeff Goodman, just so you know,
Yeah.
it's not going to be. Uh, yeah. So I think, important things. Portal closes the 22nd of April, I believe. So on the 23rd, I think that's when it is. Then no one can enter the portal at that point. I believe that's the date. Is that what you understand too?
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
And
So if
then,
that's the case, whenever it closes, it doesn't matter the date. Just know that until that date happens,
right.
you don't know what's going to happen. Once
You
you enter the
got,
portal, you can stay in kind of indefinitely. I mean, so it's not once you're in, then until you pull yourself out, you're
there's no
a
time.
free
Right. There's
agent for a
no, oh,
couple
you got to
months.
make it.
You
Right.
could
It's not
right.
like
You
the
can join a
NBA
team by
draft.
September or something
Not
like
like
that.
the NBA draft. You don't have to pick, there's a
Right.
date by which you got to make a decision. No.
Exactly.
Um,
Uh,
but
so I,
I'm saying all this just to illustrate the point that with regard to anybody, you can't know until it's over. And, I'm not seeing, it's interesting, Wisconsin is an example of a program. I've noticed that there are guys putting out graphics indicating that they're returning, that they're staying. And Michigan
right.
State, I think, has done that. at times in the past, I think.
Maybe.
I don't
Yeah.
recall for sure, but I think that's happened. I haven't seen that for any Michigan State player thus far. Doesn't mean anything. I don't mean to suggest, hey, the whole roster's leaving, but it'll be interesting to see if that kind of thing happens, or if it just kind of the day goes by and nobody else is in the portal, and that's that. But so there's some things to keep in mind about all this. One thing is just psychologically, as a fan, you need to be prepared for the idea that anything can happen. As we're talking
Yeah.
about, if somebody who conducted themselves the way that Trey Holloman did can enter the portal, well, then anybody could enter the portal, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
And
it's that simple. And and conversely, although as I say, at a certain point I didn't believe this, now I kind of do. Um, until that door's closed, it isn't closed. Now
sure.
you can, listeners might note who are paying attention to this stuff on social media, without going into detail, there might be things that you see that either from the player or from people connected to the player that would lead you to believe that's highly unlikely. And that might well be right. I'm just saying what I've heard is no doors are closed and conversation has been ongoing, has occurred since he entered, not just before. And it doesn't do anybody any good to take your hurt feelings, whether you have any justification for feeling hurt or not, and start getting on social media and attacking the player,
Yeah.
somebody related to the player, any of that nonsense. First of all, I don't I don't know what you're hoping to accomplish with that.
Yeah. It's just
You think
people
you're going to
just
change
blowing off steam.
minds by doing that?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
And venting, go find a pillow to yell into. I mean, really, it's childlike behavior, and it
Yeah.
doesn't do anybody any good. So why get involved with it?
Yeah.
Um,
I was going to make
and
2 points. Oh,
I
go ahead.
say this as somebody who probably felt as disappointed to see that news when I saw it. You know where I was? I was in Ann Arbor. How's that?
Oh my, what? What are you doing there? No, we didn't need to know that.
I was in it. I was in downtown Ann Arbor. I was
At
just
least you
getting
didn't see Trey
ready.
coming out of the basketball offices in
I
Chrysler or
was
something. That would
just
have been more
getting
concerning.
ready to go to Blimpie Burger, and I walked up and found out they're closed for the week, which I was very disconcerted by. And then I looked at my phone and said, "Oh, Trey Holloman's in the portal."
That's worse than the Blimpie Burger being closed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a hell of a blow. But I guess my point is, I understand the hurt feelings. I felt
Yeah.
terrible
Right.
reading that
Right.
as an
Yeah. I
MSU
know.
fan because you get, Trey's been here 3 years. You get so connected to the kid. He seemed to stand for everything we want Michigan State basketball to be about.
Exactly. Yeah.
He is a guy who would be, and I certainly would have been surprised if he were not a starter next year. And you just feel, you feel like you took a gut punch, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, we also have to acknowledge this. We as MSU fans are not used to this because it hasn't
Oh,
happened.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It was the
Everybody
first sort of
who's
first time.
left,
Yeah.
the closest to a scenario where, oh, that's a guy MSU really wanted back and they couldn't get him to come back, is kind of toward the last minute. There was a thought last year that maybe they actually wanted Mady Sissoko to come back. And then he made the decision, no, you know what? I think I'm going to go to Cal.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that worked well for everybody because it opened up an opportunity for MSU to add Zapala. And I think that worked well. And Mady had, by all accounts, a pretty good year at Cal. So
Yeah.
good for him. It worked out. But that's the closest we've had to this. And it
Yeah.
wasn't very close. So
I
I
was,
think that's also part of this deal, too, is MSU fans are not used to this, which pretty much every other program is. And you know, it's not their fault. You see Tom Izzo and you see the players all talking about strength in numbers, the connectedness, the commitment, all of that. And then you see something like this, and it makes you, I think it's fair for people to say, what was that all about? And to get either disappointed or angry or both
Yeah.
at someone they start to feel, well, this person was just talking a bunch of jive.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that's the case. I saw nothing out of Trey Holloman that suggested to me he was anything but 100% bought in, and nothing in
Yeah.
terms of the way he played and the way he conducted himself. Nothing. So I think he held up his end of the bargain. But I
We had him on
understand.
for 30 minutes, right? We got a good feel for him, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's who he is. I don't think we
Hmm.
were snowed, but I
Yeah.
understand why people feel a sense of betrayal because this program is different. It operates
Yeah.
differently. Tom Izzo talks
Right.
about, I'm not going to recruit over guys. And so they look at this, they say, "Hey, he does everything he can as a coach. Yes, he believed it was the best way to win, so it wasn't all altruistic, but he's somebody who believes in his guys, gives them opportunities to earn a role. And if they do enough to earn it, they keep that role, even if it means that other guys might not play as much. You know, again, I'm not saying he's a saint for doing that. He believes it was the best way for this group to win. But the fact remains, those are the pillars that the program's built on. And so when something like this happens, I understand people getting upset, but trust me, it's not good for you to go out on social media and start venting about this stuff.
Yeah.
It
That's
doesn't do
obviously dumb.
anybody any good. Conversely, I would, I was I was listening to a Conan O'Brien channel on Sirius yesterday afternoon, and I was out very briefly, was in my car, but I happened to hear this point he made. He was talking about entertainers, and this is such good advice for anyone who's even remotely in the public eye. He said, the one thing you cannot do, don't ever read the comments.
Yeah. Right.
And it's 100% true. And I would advise that student athletes and their families should live by that rule. And that's not casting aspersions on anybody other than to say, if you do that, you will drive yourself crazy. I am
Yeah.
speaking too from personal experience on this. I, some of what I do for work, I work with people who are artists who are in public facing professions. Let's put it that way. And to the extent that they might actually have things like websites for their fans who have their little forums, their message boards, and they post about the artists and all that kind of stuff. I stopped reading anything a decade ago. I had
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
because I would see stuff that was so inaccurate and so maddening that I would feel anger start to well up inside and feel like I had to respond. And thankfully, with very, very, very rare exceptions, I was able to stifle that desire. But it's hard. And I would say the same thing to anybody who's a player, a parent of a player, a sibling of a player. Do not read this stuff because you will invariably, at some point, you will see something that will anger you beyond belief. And then you might not be able to stifle that urge to respond. And that's where it goes off the rails. So
Okay.
both sides,
I,
stop.
I would also,
Just
I'd also say
stop.
these are oftentimes, at least the ones we've visited with, these are all good kids in a
Absolutely.
I'll say bad system or a rotten system or a system that isn't best for fans and athletes right now. And so I don't think you can get upset with people for doing what's best for them, uh, even though it's because it's just a dumb system and how it is structured. We'll talk later, maybe, about how it can be refined.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As far as
Do
the
want to
portal
go back to
goes,
that.
as
Yeah,
far as
let's
the
talk
portal
about the other
goes,
two guys.
yeah. Well, I just wanted to say two other things. One is the portal is always open for coaches. So we always have to recognize that, right? Coaches can
100%.
leave and come at any time. And so we are okay with that. We've got used to that. And then finally, the other thing about Tre Holloman that I think is tricky, and this goes for the next two players we'll talk about briefly. Uh, we don't know, we do not know how much they're getting paid. We know they're getting paid something, and it's good. That's all we, made the most we could say. So when we see offers coming out, whether they're accurate or inaccurate, we don't know how much different that is than what they're making. So we can say, oh, well, someone's playing $1 million. Well, why does Michigan State pay $1 million? Well, you don't even know how much Michigan State's paying him, for instance, or the NIL deal. Uh, so I think that's important to kind of keep in mind. And also, when we say Tom Izzo wants to pay market, it's important to point out, much like your house, the market is really what the person who's going to spend the most money on that house is. That is
Correct.
the market. Now, if Tom Izzo thinks you're worth 100,000, let's say, and someone else offers you 1 million, well, you could say, well, the fair market is, well, it's 1 million. You're worth $1 million. But Izzo may not see that as a value for a variety of reasons, as you mentioned. The other players in the locker room, what you have to do for further players, blah 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 blah. So we can say the same thing. That what is the fair market value? Well, it's whatever Tom Izzo thinks because that's what he's going to pay players. But it also there may be some team somewhere that has one donor who's like, I really want that guy, and I'm going to spend, I'll give you $10 million to make sure we secure him, whatever. So it makes conversation sometimes a little bit tricky. But anyway, let's talk
I
about the.
well,
Go ahead.
you
You can go
know,
and respond to that.
I my father, when I was growing up, he was in sales, and he said something to me when I was probably an adolescent that is right on point with this. He said there is no such thing as an objectively good deal. It is entirely based on your perception. If you believe you got a good deal, you got a good deal.
Right.
This is why I
Exactly.
always find people when they talk about, restaurant reviews, they say, "Oh, the portion size was the food tasted good, but it was too expensive." Okay, that could be your subjective belief.
Hmm.
There's no objectivity to that at all.
Right.
Because somebody else could say, "Yeah, the portion size is a little small, but that flavor was so great it's worth it to me." It's
Exactly.
entirely subjective.
Yeah.
And that's what you're really talking about. This is an entirely subjective process when we talk about value,
Yeah.
you know?
And it's also behind fog on both sides. So it's
Absolutely.
really so,
So
especially
there's
for someone
no
looking in
there's
from the
no
outside, you don't know any details. You're just guessing. You're just by the things are just thrown out in the
I,
public. So anyway,
I would revert to I would fall back rather on the same play to the same place, same position that I typically get to when we talk about MSU basketball, which is, well, either you believe that Tom Izzo is a good steward of his program and isn't going to do anything that he believes would harm the program, or you don't.
yeah,
And especially it's true. It's one thing when you might take issue with a strategic decision that you see unfold on the court in front of you. This stuff, come on. I mean, opaque doesn't even begin to describe it. You can't
yeah,
know. You have
yeah,
no idea as a fan. I'm telling you, however self assured I might sound here, I don't know. How could I know? And how could
yeah.
anybody know that's outside of a handful of people who are part of these discussions? And you know what? I'm going to bet that sometimes they don't even fully know. They know what they
Right.
hear,
Yeah.
but they don't, like going back to what we were talking about, agents exaggerating offers. How do you know if that's true or not, what you're hearing? The agent says to you, well, I've got $2 million offer from school X. What are you going to do? You're going to call that school up and say, hey, coach, I'm over here in East Lansing. Is that what you're offering this guy to verify it? And even if he tells you yes, is that true?
Right. Yeah. Right.
It's all a mystery. It's all in gray and blurry, and you just don't know what the reality is all the time, or even most of the time. That's the truth. But anyway, we should talk about the other two guys for a
Yeah.
second.
So let's talk about speaking of gray and murky and opaque. We'll talk about Xavier Booker, a guy who came in. There was a lot of speculation that he'd leave last year. In fact, there was a lot of speculation people midway through this freshman year concerned that he wasn't going to have playing time, and you just need to put him out there. And the team was struggling. Why not go with them? they couldn't get enough of him. And then now it's to the point where I don't think a whole lot of people are really upset who are Spartan fans of Xavier Booker. Maybe not that they think he's a bad person, but he just did not live up to the potential that I think we thought. Certainly, I know you and I were thinking in December maybe he'd sort of turned a little bit of a corner, and
Mhm.
then his playing time has dwindled. He was not as effective down the stretch. He had a couple moments like he had that three against Michigan, which is important, but for the most part, he really struggled and just that whatever the light didn't turn on. What do you want to say? And so he entered the portal, which I think came as a surprise to no one, especially with the new recruits coming in and sort of where his place is on the team. So I mean, I heard today there's an offer at UCLA, but again, these are just
No, no, he committed to
speculation.
he committed to
Oh, he did.
UCLA.
Well, there you go. See,
He
I
committed
was
to
busy
UCLA
driving for a
tonight.
couple hours.
The rumor was
One and a half
1.5,
million.
yeah, 1.5 million. Um, let's talk about that aspect first, and then we'll
Sure.
talk about the rest of it. Initially, I think the reaction was, wow, frying pan into the fire. Because the knock on Book has been, well, he doesn't play hard enough and his motor isn't revved up consistently. And so he struggled with meeting Tom Izzo's standards. And now he's going to play for a guy in Mick Cronin who has a lot of similarities with that, except he'll really put you on blast. He'll go into a press conference
Yeah,
and talk
he'll
about you
publicly call you
specifically.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which Izzo doesn't tend to do. I mean, he'll talk in generalities, but it's not at the level Mick Cronin does, right? And at first, I'll admit, I was like, yeah, that's really a questionable decision. I don't care about the money. You could have gotten probably roughly equivalent money, I would think, from somewhere that was going to be a lot more forgiving about your deficiencies and just figure that, hey, we're going to catch lightning in a bottle. And, the
yeah,
6'11 guy that can run the floor is going to shoot threes better for us next year. And we'll live with everything else. But I started reflecting on it, and if I'm right, and this is just a theory, I don't know anything, but if I'm right, it actually would reflect pretty well on him and on the people around him. I don't think there's any question he needed a fresh start.
yeah.
It just wasn't working at Michigan State. But when he committed to Michigan State, all of this stuff was known. Like, yeah, he's got to get stronger, which I think he has.
Hmm.
Maybe not strong enough, but he's gotten stronger at MSU, no question. He's got to learn how to play. He's got to learn what playing hard really means. As Jaron Jackson talks about, I've seen him refer to it 2 or 3 different podcast interviews this year. He talks about how it might have been the first practice. Izzo told him, "All right, run from this corner of the floor to that corner of the floor," and Jaron did it and thought he was going hard, and Izzo stopped him and said, "What are you doing?" And his reaction was, "What are you talking about? I ran." And he said, he took Kyle Arns. Kyle, run. And Kyle Arns showed Jaron, and Jaron, oh, he's like, I didn't know what that really meant. I had to learn that. And he did. And now he's an all-star and all the rest. And he credits Izzo with a lot of that stuff when you see him interviewed.
Sure.
Uh, I think I think that's something that obviously we know it was understood. Book needed a lot of that. He was not pushed in high school. He was allowed to coast, frankly.
Right.
And so but those around him, his family, and even Book himself, I think, recognized the reality of that. And that was a big part of the reason why they opted to commit to Michigan State in the first place. And so they've got to know who Mick Cronin is, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I could see a scenario where they say, hey, he needs a fresh start, but you still need to be, or if he's making the call, I still need to be in an environment where I'm going to be held accountable, where the coach
Right.
isn't going to say, hey, Book, just go out and put up 8 threes a game. We're good. Like they're going to make him work. And Cronin will. He's not going to get anything handed to him. A roll, minutes, shots, none of that. He's going to have to guard. He's going to have to rebound. He's going to have to play hard and with toughness. And if he doesn't do those things, he won't play very much. If that's the case, if that is the dynamic of the decision, then that's one you can't have any fault with. And I kind of, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, that's that's a decision you can get behind. Because I think we all, you said it, I think everybody acknowledges it wasn't working here. I
Yeah.
mean, what did he play in four tournament games? I think he played a couple of spot duty minutes against Bryant.
Maybe 10 minutes total, if that. I
No, I
mean, if
don't
it's
even
that
think it
much.
was that.
6 minutes. Yeah. But
I
not
don't even
much.
think it
Yeah.
was that much.
Yeah.
And down the stretch in the regular season, his role was basically down to like one 3 or 4 minute turn a game.
Yeah.
I think we had a lot of optimism because I think he closed last season, his freshman season, playing better.
Hmm.
He definitely did. And then we saw him in those games in Spain. The first game, he was great. 20 plus points. He didn't repeat that level of performance the rest of the way over there, but he was still showing you some things. So I think there was
Right.
reason to be optimistic. And he was a starter at the beginning of the season, but some point, and I don't remember now when exactly it was, November or December, Jackson Kohler moved into that starting power forward spot and never gave it up.
Yeah.
And so it was always from that point forward when Jackson Kohler was making it clear, hey, he's arrived. He's healthy now. He's in great shape, and he's bringing all the things we talk about as lacking with Book, right? Toughness, energy, intensity, motor, all of that stuff is what Jackson does. Plus, he does some other basketball things pretty well. It was clear he wasn't going to give that role up. And then you add in that as the year went on, I think Michigan State found there were situations where it was advantageous for them to go small at the four. And so
Hmm.
we started to see more of Cohen Carr there occasionally. We started to see more of Frankie Fiddler, especially the back half of Big Ten play, where I think he
Right.
really started to pick it up and find his role in this team. And it just didn't leave an opportunity for Book. And then you look at next year, well, you got Kohler back, we think, at the four. I'm not going to assume anything, but I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. Right.
back. Um, Book's not a five man. And you've got Carson Cooper and you have Jesse McCullough, who could also play the four, by the way, and who I've heard rave reviews about during his redshirt season. I think there's no question he's going to play. And then you've got a guy like Cam Ward coming in, who we know can play power forward, and I wouldn't be surprised to see play some power forward. Oh, and then assuming that Cohen Carr's back, uh, he could play some four too. So you very quickly get to the point where you're like, well, is there really a good opportunity for Book to expand his role? And I don't think the answer is yes.
Yeah. No, I
So
agree.
it made a lot of sense both ways. I don't, it's funny. Jim Comparoni posted that he happened to be, I think he said he was coming out of Burke when Booker and his family were going in, and he said they all looked very solemn, and that's to be expected. I don't think, I wouldn't be surprised if Xavier Booker doesn't really want to leave, but this is one where, just as the next one we'll talk about, is where the situation seems to make sense for everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
I've got nothing, you could tell, oh, I wish he played harder and he doesn't care. I don't believe he doesn't care. I wish him nothing but the best. I hope it works out at UCLA every game other than when they're in East Lansing.
Hmm.
And I don't know why anybody would feel any differently.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk about the next one is Gehrig Normand. We've had him on our show twice.
Yeah.
Tons of character, or lots of personality, I should say, charisma. Kind of goofy guy, and some watch him walk around during the games and warm ups and stuff. Got injured right before the season started. He redshirted his first year, so this is his freshman year, redshirt freshman. And we saw this with Jackson Kohler. You get that foot injury, you never quite catch up. The sort of starting lineup and the rotations kind of get set. You're out of it, and then you just with the team as deep as it was, and without any injuries, there's really no opportunity to ever bust into it. And then certainly looking at next year, just like you went through, we got Kurtang, we got Jordan Scott coming. Who knows as far as Holloman and Richardson. And it, again, this is a guy who looks like he's just going to the odd man out again, even though now he may
Yeah.
be healthy. And he didn't show enough. Certainly, he didn't show enough during practices during that would justify him coming in because if the guy's shooting like 50% from three during the practices, you're going to find a way to get him on the court for a team that was struggling from three last year. But you obviously didn't have what they
You
thought
would
they
think.
needed, right?
You're you would think that's correct. You would assume. Uh, I like you in the beginning there. You talked about him as a personality, and we did have him on twice, and I thought he was a blast to talk to. I thought he was a kid with a ton of charisma. Really liked him, and he seemed to be well liked by his teammates. Everything I observed, um, I think you would probably agree with that. I
Yep.
think the injury didn't help. And then the other thing I would say, and whether the injury had something to do with this or what, I don't know. Um, for whatever reason, I don't think he developed physically the way that they needed him to. If you look at him right now, I don't think his body looks markedly different
I
than
agree.
it did when he started, right?
Hmm.
And if you think about guys in the past at MSU, we'll keep it to 6'5" ish wings. Think about somebody like Kyle Arns. Even think about somebody like Matt McQuaid,
I was
who
going
made
to
a
more
physical
equivalent. Yeah.
transformation, right? Mo Ager got, never got huge, but he got stronger as he went, He changed his body. And that's a very common thing. And I don't think we saw much evidence, at least not obviously, of that happening with Gehrig enough to probably put him in position where he could say, "Hey, I got a real shot to break into the rotation next year." From the little bits that I've heard, I wouldn't be shocked to see him land at another high major. I don't think it was as obvious as Booker. To me, that Booker landing at a place like UCLA, I didn't think it would necessarily be that program, but to see him at another high major was an obvious thing that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Whatever
The
people
physical
might
tools
think,
and stuff. Yeah. Right.
when you're 6'11" and you can run a little bit and they think you might be able to shoot at some point, people bet on that at every level of basketball. You've got to utterly convince them you can't do it. And he hasn't done enough to do that. So that was obvious. With Gehrig, I don't think it's quite in that category, but I won't be surprised. I could see him at another high major. Theoretically, you could imagine him maybe landing at sort of like a mid-major plus type school, like maybe a school in the American. I don't have any specific intel
Yeah.
on
Sure.
that. I'm just saying that kind of level, or even like maybe a Missouri Valley,
Right.
where
Yeah.
yeah, it's
He seems like a Missouri
major,
Valley player. Yeah.
yeah. And so I think any of those things are possible. It won't surprise me if he ends up at another high major because he was a top 100 kid out of high school, and people are still going to bet on those kind of kids to an extent. So again, wherever he lands, we don't know where that is yet. Nothing but the best wishes. He was a great guest for us. Um, I hope he had a. I hope he had as much fun as it looked like he was having during his two
Yeah.
years at MSU. And best of luck for him as wherever he ends up. And hopefully he finds an opportunity to play more and to do what he wants to do and get what he wants to get out of his college basketball experience.
Certainly listening to him when he's talking to us the second time, I definitely would want him to be on my golf team. Uh, he sounded like he's a pretty good golfer when he and Cooper would go up against each other. So then the next segment we're going to call Coming or Going. And this is brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If things aren't clear, it could be because your windows are dirty. So make sure you get those cleaned. The Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids is an excellent choice. As a listener to the show, you get 15% off your estimate. You can find that at our support page at the Final Force on the schedule.com/support. They can clean any sort of window, whether it's residential, commercial. They clean the windows of the Capitol. They're professionals. They get on the ladders so you don't have to. They'll clean the insides, the outsides, the windowsills, the blinds, the screens, they will do whatever you want them to do, and they do it for a great price. And again, just the nicest guys when they came to our house and did it. So I can't recommend more highly the Squeegee Squad in Grand Rapids. So check them out today. You'll be glad you did. And so we have two players I think that would sort of fall into this category. So first, let's go for the easier one, and that's Zapaya. Zap, Zapawa. I got to put the W there now. I
Wow.
got to get better at that. So there was some talk, at least for a while, near the end of the season, maybe the last month or two, about trying to get him one of his
Yeah.
Utah State years as a redshirt. I don't know. Do you think is that something that's still they're
I
working on, or do you
I've
think
heard
that's kind of past?
I've heard nothing in recent weeks, and all I had heard before that was this was something they were probably going to try. For all I know, they may have already tried and had it fail.
Right.
Doesn't seem like the NCAA is interested in stopping anybody from doing anything these days.
That would
Because
be,
again, they're
yeah.
the
Right.
Washington Generals of the legal world.
Yeah.
But I don't I have not heard anything. So I think the safe assumption would be that he's not back because that certainly seems to be how MSU was treating it
Yeah.
and how his demeanor seemed to be. Like he wasn't talking about, maybe I'll get, you would a lot of times when that kind of thing is in the air, you might have somebody at least allude to the possibility and say, well, I'm trying, maybe I'll come back. We didn't hear any of that from him. So
Yeah. Right.
at this stage, I would probably be inclined to say he's done, but we'll see when we see.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I can't think of anything else to come and go. Oh, I guess we could talk about Jase Richardson. He might be an important piece.
Yeah,
So
you
the
think?
uh, and the question here is different. This is not a portal question. I don't think. I mean, again, don't know for sure, but most likely with Jase Richardson, the question is going pro, NBA, G League, lottery, whatever, or sticking around for another year at Michigan State. He's a little tricky in the sense that he doesn't, at least from as far as we can tell, he's not a kid who needs a bunch of money. His family doesn't need his
No.
support financially. So it's not a financial decision like of desperation, we'll say. I don't know the better term for. Uh, Obviously, in the NBA, you get a contract when if you get drafted. There's a rookie contract. It's much better when you get to your second contract. So of course, the sooner you get to your second
Yep.
contract, the sooner you can make the real money. And then of course, if you're there younger, well, then you're presumably your career is going to last a year longer. And so with the second, third, fourth contracts or
Yep.
whatever, you're going to be playing longer. The other question, of course, with him is he's obviously attracted a lot of attention from the NBA. First round, almost for sure, it sounds like. Where in the first round? Not entirely clear. There are people speculating top 10. Some are speculating lower first round. It's hard
Yeah.
to say. Uh, and then I guess, if you're going to say end up in the G League, which can still happen with first round players, you saw with Max Christie, and he ended up in the G League and worked his way onto a squad. Um, is there something that you go to the G League, I guess I don't know what the money you're making. I suppose whatever the contract is,
Well, he's
your
not going to
your
be on a
contract.
two-way deal. So
Right,
the financial aspects of that aren't relevant.
right. So the NIL situation, we're not going to talk about that because I think whatever he would need to in order to stay, if that was a financial decision, would probably be
Yeah.
taken care of at Michigan State. So I think that's not even worth discussing. I guess one of the bigger questions is what what about staying would be useful for him? For instance, when Xavier Booker, or not Xavier, sorry, Xavier Tillman was in his junior year completing it, and the question was, does he stay for his senior year or does he leave for the NBA as a junior? It became pretty clear at that point there was really not much more in the college game that he had to prove, or that he had to refine, or to raise his stock or to be prepared for the NBA. Like he had a shot, he was an elite defender, he's a good rebounder. There wasn't anything more he could really make better. And so it didn't make much sense for him to stick around. I guess was sort of my impression with Xavier when he left. Is there something with Jace? You're like, he's got to prove himself because he's 6'2". So you're going to be a point guard. I mean, I guess that might be the question. And the other thing that we don't know, and we never will, we met him, for half an hour. I mean, really great kid. A lot of fun. He's getting ready to play EA Sports, the football at the end. But is how much does he want to be in college? Does he want to try for Final Four? Because again, if you don't, if it, what your incentives are. I mean, we don't know any of these things. I mean, the only one who knows that is really him. I mean, probably even more than his parents, but they probably know him better than obviously we do. And certainly Izzo knows him, third best, let's say, beyond his parents. So anyway, there are a lot of considerations. We don't know anything at this point, except we know he has not said, I'm leaving for the draft. That's all we know as of what, 10 o'clock, I think. So PM. So where do you land on the Jase Richardson? What have you heard? Blah, blah, blah.
Well, nothing, nothing that
You've heard
would
nothing.
answer. I haven't heard anything that would answer that
Yeah, right.
question. But I've said from the moment in, say, early January, I think is when the talk really started, that you started to see him appearing on mock draft boards. The one thing I feel reasonably certain of is that whatever decision gets made will be a really good decision.
Right. Yeah.
And there is no bad decision here because his father knows that life as well as you could. His mother has also been involved in basketball circles for a long time. So he's got that experience to draw upon. He has a head coach in Tom Izzo who does everything he can to get these guys the best information on this stuff. And then from what we have seen, and not just when we had him on, but just watching how he conducts himself. I've said this
Oh yeah,
before.
sure.
I mean, that kid is like 18 going on 38. I
Old
mean,
soul. Yeah.
you watch how he handles himself in interviews, and my God, he's in the top 5 all time for Izzo, no question in my mind, in terms of how well he handled himself.
Yes.
And and so a kid with that kind of, there's sometimes, I'll give you an example. Adrian Payne was a guy that there was a point after his junior year where it looked like he might go pro. And I really did worry about that a little bit because I wondered just things you heard and then things you could even see. Like he was such a nice, came off as such a nice guy, but maybe not super mature at that point in
Right.
his life.
Hmm. Yep.
And that's who you worry about. You worry about those guys. They would seem more likely to maybe make a bad decision, to be influenced unduly by people who don't have their best interests at heart. Um, those are the things you worry about. None of that is in the equation, at least from anything I know, with Jase Richardson. I think from a maturity point of view, you couldn't ask for a more mature teenager
Right.
than
Yeah.
he is. So I don't think any of that's relevant. Like if he decides to go, he'll be fine.
Yeah.
He'll be more
I
than
agree.
fine. What I think it comes down to, I think you're absolutely correct in saying, look, NIL isn't really a factor here because if he wants to come back, Michigan State, he has earned enough that Michigan
Yeah.
State will get him whatever they feel he needs, whatever all the parties feel he needs. I don't worry about it. I don't waste 1 second worrying about that. That will be there if the decision is made, but that's not what's going to drive the decision. I don't even know that I think the stuff about, well, you got to go early because the sooner you get started, the sooner you get to the second contract. I don't I don't anticipate that would drive it.
I
But this
agree.
is just
Yeah.
this is just my guess,
Yeah. Sure.
which I could be totally full of it, but I feel okay about where I'm landing on this. I would think, and it's also important to note one other thing. Jason Richardson, I have heard or read say that just like in Jace's recruiting, he will make the decision. And when you
Hmm.
watch him conduct himself, you understand pretty quickly why his parents have the confidence to have him make his own decisions because he looks like he's got a pretty good head on his shoulders.
Yep.
So it seems like it's going to be his call. He's going to listen to everybody around him, but it's going to be his call. So I think what it really comes down to is something that's pretty simple. Does Jase Richardson want to be done with college?
Right.
And that's something that you can't quantify. It's a contract isn't, an amount of compensation on a contract is not going to answer that for you. Um, Draft position isn't going to answer that for you. None of that stuff will answer that. And I really think that's what it's about. And so he may feel like, you know what, I loved my year, but I can't pass up on this opportunity and I feel ready for it. Then that's what it'll be. And, I think everybody will react to that with, hey, Godspeed, I'm
Right.
just
Yeah.
glad we got to watch 1 year of him in East Lansing, right? I don't think anybody would begrudge him that. I certainly would hope not. But he could, and Michigan State has had guys do this twice, I can think of. Gary Harris and Miles Bridges. They
Hmm.
both would have been, if not lottery picks, they would have easily been first rounders. There was no question. And everybody who does the draft stuff was convinced they were going to go. Because, of course, everybody goes as soon as they can. Well, not at
Right.
Michigan State. Those two guys opted to come back for another year because they decided they just weren't done with being a college student. And, the other thing, too, about Jase Richardson is, by all accounts, he takes being a student really seriously. We don't, and I've heard Izzo, I believe, has said he had a 3.9 GPA this year. So he takes it pretty seriously. Maybe he actually likes the process of being not just a student athlete, but a student. And he wants to be in that environment for another year. He wants to be around his teammates. He wants to build Legos with Cohen Carr for another year, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not
I
saying that that's definitively the case or that I know that or that I even think that'll be, but I think that's what the decision probably turns on is a very
Yeah.
simple thing. Do I want to spend another year in college for whatever reasons, or am I ready to go and become a professional? And that's that. I mean, you can make basketball arguments. You could say, for example, let's say Trey Holloman does in fact leave. There is a world in which Michigan State could say, well, Jace, you're going to get the minutes which, say you even uptick Jeremy's minutes a little bit from last year. You could still say, hey, Jace, of the 29, 30 minutes a game, you're going to play 12 of them at the point. And
right.
even when you're not at the point, you're going to still end up with the ball in your hands a decent amount, even though you're nominally off the ball, right? And that is something he could, that's something, whether he goes or stays, he's got to work on. He's got to become, I think he's got all the tools for it, but he's got to spend more time as a point guard because that's probably where his long term future is.
Sure.
I think definitely that's where it is. So, you could make the argument, well, he could spend a year doing more of that at Michigan State than he did this season. Okay. But he could also do that in the pros. I don't think that'll
Yeah.
drive it.
Right.
Beyond that, what else does he have to really work on that isn't going to be there for him to have to work? He's going to need to learn how to play against bigger, faster, more athletic guys in the NBA. Well, the only way you do that is by playing in the NBA.
Right.
So that's not, I think from a basketball point of view, Jesus, not many guys ever have been more efficient than Jase Richardson was last year. I don't think he's got a hell of a lot to learn on that level. I really think it just comes down to where does he want to be next year? Where does he feel most comfortable?
Yeah. No, I think, and I guess the other thing you would say is the thing people worry about is, well, what if he decides to stay in college because he likes college a lot, and God forbid he gets injured, and he blows his Achilles or something like that, he misses his chance to make the NBA. This, and I know you feel the same way. If this kid never played basketball again, I don't worry about him. Like he'd be totally fine in
Oh,
life. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be his
yeah.
dream. I'm sure it's not what he wants to do. I'm sure he wants to do something before, he wants to play basketball at the highest levels as long as he can, win championships, all those sorts of things. But it's not like this kid's going to, you know, turn into a puddle and just kind of be his life's going to be over. He's going
Yeah.
to be okay.
There's that, which very definitely I agree with 100%. That guy will be a success no matter what happens in life. Um, but that stuff also gets overblown because one, we're in an NIL environment. I suspect if he comes back to Michigan State, um, what he would make in NIL, and I'm just guessing, but I would guess it's at the very least a good percentage of what he would make on a rookie
Oh,
deal.
sure.
Maybe not
Yeah.
the entirety of it, but a good hunk of it. And then with insurance policies, et cetera, he would not be left standing high and dry. It's also worth noting, as you say, one of the motivations in this stuff is, well, the sooner you get there, the sooner you get to the second contract. Well, that takes a while. Who's to say that in your first NBA training camp you don't have an injury that ends your career? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I don't think that can be or should be the deciding factor. Once upon a time, it made sense to factor that in because if you stayed in college, that meant that,
Yeah. You're
well,
foregoing
unless you were getting
salary,
bags
money.
under
Yeah.
the table, you weren't getting paid anything. Well, we're
Right.
past that now.
Yeah.
They started it. The first thing was allowing these guys to take out insurance policies, which helped. Then, with the advent of NIL, now you're adding even more on top of that. I don't think that the injury thing should be as big a factor. Now, people may, but one thing I will say, though, it is worth mentioning as a counter to that with Jase. It is important to remember he had an injury in high school, which I'm
Right.
sure
So
many
he
of our
knows what it's
listeners have
like. Yeah.
seen discussed, that they thought could end his ability to play basketball. And he's gotten a second lease on life. So does that factor into this? Maybe. Maybe it does.
Yeah.
But I
All
think
right.
in
And so,
general, it's not a factor as much as people might think.
so the last segment here we'll call Portal Pickups. And this is brought to you by Nudge Printing. Friends, the probably things you should pick up. Now, I'm not wearing Nudge Printing today. I'm wearing my Tigers quarter zip here in honor of opening day in Comerica, where Tigers won. They actually look like a
And Tom
picked it
Izzo
up from
was
last
there
year.
in the expensive seats,
Right. So anyway,
wasting his time. Why isn't he calling people in the portal?
right. Well, and that's what we'll talk about here in just a second. Uh, make sure you pick up your stuff at Nudge Printing. You can head on over to nudgeprinting.com. Right now they have a sale on codes for 15% off, but guess what? I have a better deal for you. 20% off as a listener to the show if you type in Final Four as one word into checkout when you check things out. You can get anything you want there as far as Spartan apparel, quarter zips, t-shirts, hoodies, all kinds of stuff. Great things, great products, quality products. We have a ton of them. We've had people buy them for friends and then keep them because they're so good. So just buy two. That way you can give one to your friend and also keep one for yourself. Nudge Printing is, again, the best place to go. They have, if you want logo stuff from our show, you can find that as well. Just go to nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS. You can also find a link for it on our support page, which is tiffnots.com/support. Either way, you can buy that stuff and buy other stuff with Spartan Apparel and other schools. They've got some Indiana stuff now. They have Iowa. I think those are the other Big Ten schools, and a bunch of different other schools in the state of Michigan and around the country. So cool stuff. Check it out, nudgeprinting.com. Great sponsor of the show. And so when we talk about the portal and pickups, I, I'll say this so you don't have to say it. So we just kind of get past this. So we've had a number of years now with the portal, with Michigan State adding players. Very rarely do we know about these portal pickups until it's pretty much over. So for people to think that nothing's happening because they're not hearing anything, well, that's just kind of the way Michigan State operates. The only thing that's obvious with Michigan State when it comes to recruiting is who they're targeting. And that's because you just can't it's not a secret when you show up at someone's AU game like 10 times. It's pretty obvious that you're recruiting someone. You show up in the cafeteria and have lunch with them or something, like what Jordan Scott was telling us, I think, when he was getting recruited by Izzo. So recruiting's different when it comes to portal. As you mentioned, it's a lot of just phone calls. You've seen players, maybe you recruited them at some point, and that's why you just reach out. Hey, we saw you in the portal. We really liked you. We missed a chance of connecting before. What do you think about coming to Michigan State, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's fair to say that no one is going to know anything until Michigan State's pretty much made the decision. I think it's kind of how it goes. I think maybe Micah Parrish was an example where it was pretty obvious Michigan State had an interest, and he decided to end up San Diego State, I think it was. That may be one of the few times where we kind of knew that Michigan State was targeting someone, and they didn't end up getting
No,
him.
Frankie Fiddler's went on for at least a couple weeks.
Okay, all right. So
And there
there's
were
example,
other schools, Wisconsin,
right? Wisconsin,
Nebraska. There were other schools in that mix. That was one
but
that
it's
was more of a conventional
right.
deal.
But it's fair to say, I think, that Michigan State is not just doing nothing. I think there's no
That's
question.
correct.
But I also think it's fair to say, too, that Michigan State at this point doesn't know what they need, and that for obvious reasons. I mean, just like
Right.
we don't know who's going to
Right.
be in or out of the portal, Michigan State doesn't know. They're talking to Tre Holloman. Maybe he comes back. If he does, that changes who you'd want to get. If you get someone now, well, then Trey's gone for sure. Maybe you'd rather have,
Right.
I mean, say there are a lot of things that are related to each
Yes.
other. And so you have to be careful. It's why I think Michigan State's always been very careful about this. And generally, they're not going to recruit over players, whether no matter who thinks you want to upgrade at this position, whatever. You can want what you want, but if you're watching Michigan State, that's just the way they operate. So either learn to live with it, wait a while till Tom Izzo's gone. I don't know, do what you want. But um, so making some assumptions. So let's assume Jase Richardson is gone, Tre Holloman is gone. And so everyone in the portal is gone. We already know Booker's gone, so Norman's not coming back. They're getting the two additions as far as Scott and Cam Ward. Not who, because I don't think we can possibly know who. Probably, maybe you know something, but what are the needs for Michigan State? I mean, first assuming Jace is gone and Trey's gone, are you looking for one guard, two guards? What kind of how I don't know? Maybe just help structure this conversation. I suppose about who Michigan State's going to be targeting. I'm thinking targeted big for example. Another
Well,
question.
okay, let's start. We'll go backward in terms of importance. Um, I if they were to add a big, bet the I would no. Again, can always be
Don't bet
wrong.
the house.
But I'm using the years and watching this and what they've done even in the portal era, and I think you get a pretty good picture. I'll pose it to you. Do you think it's likely that they're looking to add someone in terms of a big man who's a bona fide 15, 16 point a night guy?
No, I mean they're going to go for another Zapawa
Right,
type, right? They're going to go for
right.
someone who's
And
solid, who can play the style, who can provide backup minutes, and in case of an injury, you've got someone to fall back on. I mean, that's kind of what I would
I
guess.
I have seen people all of a sudden after the Auburn loss say it's just mind blowing sometimes. It really is. Say things like, we can't be a top 10 team with Carson Cooper as your starting center. Really? Because I just watched him play starters minutes
They were
for
one
a
of the final
top
eight
10
teams,
team.
right? Is that top 10? Is it
Yeah.
the last eight
And a team
teams
that was
left?
ranked in the top 10, if you care about ranking by the metric systems, by AP.
Yeah.
What? What are we doing? It's look, there's a lot of dummies out there, like they say, it takes all kinds to fill up the freeways or the highways. Uh, and that's, so Carson Cooper, I would be shocked if he's not the starting five man next year. And you know what? I'm great with that because I
Yeah.
thought Carson Cooper was the best defensive big man in the Big Ten last year. Number one, nobody better. And if you want to dispute that, well, you're wrong, first. Second, take a look at the numbers. Take a look at the way Michigan State's defense graded out. And when you understand the importance of a five man in a modern defense that has to contend with heavy, heavy use of pick and roll, which means your big man has to be a significant part of your defense, particularly playing the style Michigan State does, where they don't shack ball screen coverage. The five has to be active out on the floor. You can't be a top five defense if any of the pieces aren't at least functional.
Right.
And especially the five man, I would argue, other than the point, is the most important. And you might even be able to argue it's more important, but it's one of the two most important positions on the floor defensively. Not a doubt in my mind. I don't think that's a debatable point. So for Michigan State to be a top five defense, Carson Cooper played starters minutes basically at
Right.
that position, had to be pretty damn good. And he was. He was also their second best rebounder. Um, and I think while he's never going to be a 15 point a night guy, I think in part because he was playing with better guards than he was before, he was more effective offensively. He certainly
Yeah.
made strides as a free throw shooter, which helped,
Yep.
but he was also just more effective as a rim dive guy, putbacks. He was just a better all around player. So he's going to be a starter. Now, a starter at Michigan State, by that, I don't mean he's going to play 30 minutes a game. You might see him tick up to around 25, but that's
Yeah,
probably
that's my
about
thought.
where he'd max out. So then the question becomes, who picks up those minutes that this season's Apollo played? Maybe they add somebody. It's also possible, as we saw this year in certain matchups, Jackson Kohler might play some 5 minutes. That's possible.
Hmm. Yeah.
Jesse McCullough is the guy I've got my eye on because everything I hear is a rave, particularly defensively. And if that's the case, guaranteed Tom Izzo is going to play you.
Yeah.
If you can hold up. I heard from someone, I think it was someone on the Spartan Mag board, mentioned they had talked to one of the managers this year who said that McCullough was better than Xavier Booker right now. This was toward the end of the season. And I don't have any difficulty believing that in terms of what defines better at Michigan State. Because everything I heard was, oh, Jesse McCullough talks, he communicates, he knows. So the question is Jesse McCullough the guy that they feel comfortable with soaking up a lot of those additional, say, 15 minutes and at the five? And I think that's very possible. I think he also might play four as well because
Hmm.
they think he has real stretch potential offensively.
Right.
So that'll be interesting to see. It would not surprise me if Michigan State were to make a Zapala like addition, but I'm with you. I think if they do, it's going to be that kind of player. It's they're looking for a guy, and it would be that kind of guy. It would be somebody big. So they got another card to play when they're going up against, whatever monsters Purdue is rolling out. Or
Area 51, right? Kind
right.
of weird
Yeah.
situation there. Yeah.
Yeah. But it would be that kind of guy, like, oh, somebody 6'11", 7 feet with some bulk, but who can also move well enough that Michigan State feels like they can play him. And that doesn't correlate with, oh, and he's a 15-point a night guy. First of all, there aren't many guys who do all of those things I just listed. Like, I'm sure there would have been a percentage of the fan base that would have done cartwheels if MSU had gotten Owen Freeman, who was a guy they recruited out of high school. But
Right.
high school's a long time ago. And we've seen what Owen Freeman is now. And he wouldn't make any sense at Michigan State. And by the way, he wouldn't play the kind of minutes he wants to at Michigan State because he doesn't defend the way Michigan State wants a big two. And Carson Cooper would end up playing a lot of those minutes anyway.
Yeah.
So, I
What
mean,
about
to me, it's that
what about
simple.
Cam Ward then in the situation? Is he big enough, do you think, to play some back mid? Sort of like, we have Jackson
At
Kohler
the
playing the
four?
five at
Yeah.
time. No, no, I mean at the
Cam,
five. Is it
oh,
Cam Ward
no,
can play at the
no,
five, or
no,
he's not that
no.
big?
I don't think so. I
And
mean,
Jordan
look,
Scott's probably too thin not strong enough at this point. Although he sounds like he's getting a lot taller. But
I think that, you've got Kohler and presumably you have Cohen Carr can play some at the four, although I think he'll play some on the wing too, just like this year.
right,
So then the question, okay, you don't have Book anymore. Um, so the question is, who else might factor in there? And Cam Ward is the obvious thought at the four. I think Cam Ward also may play at the three. To me, he and Jordan Scott both have the potential to fill that role that Frankie Fiddler played this year.
yeah, that's what my thought. They're almost the same player in some respects as far as the position wise. Yeah,
Different players, but
different games, but yeah, right, yeah,
physically similar. The two freshmen are probably a little bit, well, they're taller. Ward might be about the same size as Frankie. Jordan Scott is not that big, but he's developing. So we'll see where he is when the season starts. Won't surprise me if he's bulked up even a little more. But yeah, those guys are the wild cards. But I definitely expect Cam Ward. I'm gonna be very surprised if Cam Ward's not playing a role.
yeah,
And so that, to me, that Kohler Ward Carr combo sort of, you don't need to add a four man. Like
right.
that's got that handled. And the possibility that Jesse McCullum might also be able to play there. So it really comes down to, if you're going to add anybody, you're going to add a five, but it's going to be a very specific type of five. It'll
Yeah.
be a Zapala like addition. I'd be shocked by anything else.
And so then the next question is the guard. if Richardson returns, that answers all the questions. I guess you could
Well,
say,
no, it
well, you
doesn't
don't have a
answer.
backup point guard with if
It
Holloman's
doesn't
gone,
answer
right?
all the questions though, because I think if you assume that Trey is leaving, you are needing to add at least one guard, no matter what Jase Richardson does. Because to not do that, I mean, I guess it's possible, but boy, that would be awfully thin.
Yeah, I mean,
Because,
someone gets sick or the flu or
well,
something. Now you're really
gets
in
hurt,
trouble.
gets in foul trouble,
Yeah,
just
right.
walk through it. Right
Yeah,
now, you again, assuming everybody's back other than Trey, you would have Jeremy and Jase return to the starting lineup. You have Cohen Carr as a wing, and you have Kerr Tang and
yeah,
Jordan Scott. So you've got five guys, but one of those guys is a redshirt freshman, and the other one's a true freshman.
right.
And you've only got Jeremy Fears and Jase Richardson who are remotely capable of playing the point in that scenario. So I would think what they would look to do is add. I'm not going to be surprised if, assuming he's back, part of the pitch to Cohen Carr is you're going to be a starting wing this year.
Hmm.
And so if that were the case and you had Jase on the other side and Jeremy is the point, well, you've got your starting lineup. So what you're looking for then is somebody capable of giving you point guard minutes and maybe a little bit of off the ball too, but who's comfortable as a sixth man type, right? And then you've got Kurt Tang as an additional guard and then Jordan Scott wherever he slots in. So I would be surprised if Trey is gone, Michigan State will add one guard. If Jase is also gone, I think they'll add two. And if
Hmm.
Jase also goes, now you're talking about, well, you need to add somebody, at least one, who's capable as a starter, who you
Yeah,
think could come in and be a double digit type scorer, give you a shooting lift, hopefully provide, well, definitely provide some support as a ball handler. I think Tom Izzo, rightly so, was pretty damn comfortable with what he had going this year, where he had two, true point guard types, and then Jase Richardson, who was capable filling in, and even Jaden Akins could do a little bit.
sure. Yeah, right.
If you start talking about, well, it's Jeremy, but then it's Cohen Carr and it's Kurt Tang and it's Jordan Scott, you're not in that position anymore. So you would need
Yeah,
to add a couple guys. So that's where I think the action, quote unquote, is in the portal with this group is at the guard spots. How many they need and what type of player they need really turns on what happens with Trey and obviously with Jace.
yeah. And I suppose with Zapawa, if he ends up getting an extension, then
That
you
would
can
change things.
then
But
he takes
again,
care of that.
I'm
That
just,
takes care of that center position. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then they clearly would not do a thing.
Yeah. All right. So then that just kind of brings us to the last, just fixing the game. Again, visit our sponsors. They're fantastic. You can find our support page, a bunch of other little offers there too for electrolyte drinks and Coach Garland's book. But and this is gonna be really quick because we've gone really long, and so I don't want to go much further longer than this. But we're not going to talk about how to fix the game. I think we both agree it's got to be contracting. On some levels that we have just this, we can't have this unlimited free agency every season. There's no reason at this point to think that there would be free agency in the middle of the season. I mean, that could be a challenge at some point too, right? I mean, you got people walk across the locker room like we have in baseball sometimes where
They do
players,
it in
walk to a different
AAU.
dugout. Yeah. So there's no reason to think that that couldn't happen at some point. And so this will have to get solved. Expecting anyone else to solve this problem is, I think, not, like Congress solving, it's not going to be the case. So there are two things that people are talking about right now. And I just want you to briefly talk about why you don't think this is a solution. So one is the House ruling,
Yep.
which came out, which basically allows universities now. So before, as we talked about, the NIL, the pay for play, whatever you want to call it, that money is from private sources, undocumented, we'll say, just kind of dark money that's going to pay for players. Well, now now what they want to do is allow colleges to actually, in their athletic department budgets, spend a certain amount of TV revenue money on their revenue sports for NIL, basically for paying players, Now, majority in most power schools is going to go to their football programs because that's where most of the revenue is. It's not basketball as much as we talk about it here. And how they allocate that, whatever, they'll figure that out. But so that's a rule, but that would be a way for the universities to pay players while still not qualifying them as employees, right? So that avoids some of the
Revenue share is the term.
right. Revenue share is sort of like a way we're not actually employees. You're just getting a share of the revenue from our
Yeah.
sport or whatever. Um, Talk about now that I think goes into effect like in July, like officially. I know
Well,
there's some
so
dispute that it
they,
actually won't. Well, right. This is what I mean. That's what I want you to get into. So
yeah.
the thought is it's going to happen in July. That's why there's all this talk right now. All this money's flying around. All these universities guaranteeing money or whatever. Is it going to happen? If it doesn't, where are we? So kind of
Okay.
try and just sum that up
So
quickly, which is probably
so
impossible.
the first thing here is there's also concurrently with this, because that house settlement could get approved by the
And that's
judge
the
at
name of the
any.
settlement. Just to be clear, it's
Yeah,
actually the
that's the
house is
court.
not.
That's
This
the name of
has
the
to do with the
case.
house. The
That's
name
the
is
name
like
of the
house versus
case.
something.
The
Yeah, right.
plaintiff's name is House.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you hear that, that's referring to the case, and it actually includes a couple of other cases that have all been subsumed into that one. Um, there's this rush to get NIL deals done before House, because part of House is supposedly an enforcement method to make sure that that pay for play isn't actually happening and all NIL is true NIL. Good luck. But
Are you saying the NCAA will lose that case too?
anyway, I just don't think they can enforce it. I don't think it's
Yeah.
realistic.
Right. Yeah.
So here's what's going to happen. The judge from Monday on, at any point, I don't think it's likely to be Monday because judges don't typically work like that. It'll probably be some point in the next week or two after that. The feeling is she's likely to approve the House settlement, which then sets into effect this revenue share equation that all these schools are going on and on about. And I couldn't understand it because I know there's already been litigation filed against what the House settlement will produce. And there will be more. And all of it is on an antitrust basis. Again, artificial restraint of trade claims and impermissible restraint of trade claims, I should say. And those plaintiffs will win. There's not a doubt in my mind they will win. And so this whole thing is a farce with House because it's not going to happen. They'll try, and then litigation will come. Maybe they'll actually go through one period where they end up paying this money out, but then the system will be riddled with metaphorical bullets by all the lawsuits, and they'll be back to square one. So I couldn't understand, why are they bothering to go through this charade? There are not dumb people at the NCAA. They know they're going to lose. Jay Billis on that Coach K show
Yeah.
opened my mind to why, and it makes perfect sense. His theory is, once they get the House settlement approved, the NCAA is then going to go to Congress. And by the way, they've been lobbying Congress all along. Ted Cruz is doing something next week on this. I know he's gotten involved, made noises about getting involved, but they're going to go to Congress and they're going to say, "Hey, Congress, look, we've gotten our act together. Look at this wonderful settlement. We're sharing revenue with the players. We just need you to give us an antitrust exemption like you gave baseball back in the 1920s. And then we're immune from those lawsuits and we can proceed accordingly." And it's all in this effort to prevent defining them as employees. Jay's case, and I totally agree with him, is that Congress is highly, 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 highly unlikely to pick up that mantle and say, "Okay, college administrators, we'll help you out." They're not going to do that. That's ludicrous. I'll be floored if we see that. They got to worry about tariffs now, right?
Yeah.
So
Have they
among
solved
other
immigration yet?
things,
I'm not sure.
and
Have they passed
and
the legislation
Greenland,
immigration
and
for the
yeah.
last 40 years?
So, but that makes sense, at least
Yeah.
strategically, that the
Right.
NCAA would say, "Hey, we got a judge to give us we agreed on the settlement and the judge approved it. Now you just got to help us tie up this loose end and we're good." But I don't think Congress is going to do that. And so, if you are someone, very succinctly here, if you are someone who wishes to see order and stability, and I mean that across the board, I don't just mean for coaches or for schools or for fans, I mean for players too. Because as I mentioned near the outset of this discussion, a lot of players who get promised things that don't end up actually materializing. Well, if
Exactly.
you're in an employment context and you've got a contract that says you're due something, you can enforce that at law. It also means you can have a situation where guys aren't being run off, which I guarantee you, of the 2,000 or so kids that are ending up in the portal this year, a hefty percentage of them are there not of their own volition. That's a
Exactly.
fact. No matter what you
Yep.
think, that's a fact. That stuff could be brought to an end. If so, my hope is that Congress does what I think they'll do and say, you guys got to get yourself out of this. And the NCAA gets House destroyed by uh, pending litigation and future litigation. And that is enough to finally force them to face the truth and say, we've got to come up with a holistic decision that is going to solve this, which is, simply put, an employment context for student athletes where they enter into contracts that are mutually binding upon themselves and the universities or some other entity that's acting on the university's behalf. I don't want to get in the weeds on that, but there might be
Yeah,
reasons
that's
to
fine.
do that. Um, and that they are collectively bargained, because you know what collective bargaining with an entity representing the employees gets you? A get out of jail
Rules.
free card with
Yeah.
regard to antitrust.
Right.
That's why that's the
And
solution.
so then I guess the next question is, all right, so let's say all these things happen as you predict, that house falls apart and Congress decides to do nothing. How long do you think it takes before the NCAA, are we talking like 12 months, 24 months before they kind of get this solved? How long does it take for this all to
I I
unwind,
can't
do you
even
think?
I can't even
Would
begin
you
to
even
guess,
guess?
because
Couldn't even guess. I
I
mean, it's
would
at
have
least a year, right?
I would have
We'll be
thought
here
we
next year
were
like this.
I would have thought we were there by now, and we're not.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
so they're clearly, like I say, House, obviously last summer when we were talking about this with Michael
Yeah. We knew it
McCann,
was going
right?
to fall apart.
Like,
Yeah.
this isn't going to work. This
Yeah.
isn't solving the problem at all. So I would have thought it's done. But now, again, Jay Billis makes a very compelling case as to what the mindset likely is. And I believe he's right. And so that has further dragged this thing out.
Yeah. Right.
I thought we would have had a solution long before now. We don't. So asking me to predict what these people, and they're not idiots at all,
No.
but what these people are going to do and how long it's going to take them to finally face reality, man, that is a fool's errand. I'd like to think it'll be sooner than later, but who knows?
Well, that's a great way to end the show. So we'll hit it right there and we'll
It
be
answers
back.
everything
Hope,
we've talked about can be answered with those two words.
who knows? I hope you've enjoyed the show. And the answer is, I don't know. All right. So we'll be back we'll try and get back to you guys weekly unless something breaks or whatever, breaking news. So until next time, the Final Four's on the schedule. Go green.